Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me. And Mike, this is sort of just a little bit of a shorter video, but we had some breaking news in terms of Alabama and Charles Bediako. As predicted, I think he will not be eligible for the rest of the year for Alabama. The judge did not approve the injunction, I guess is the wording, to extend the TRO because he was ruled ineligible by the NCAA. So he is not playing anymore. What were your initial thoughts when you saw this news come on the
Yeah,
timeline?
I think it was a little bit of a sigh of relief. I think there was a little bit of uneasiness if this was going to end up being upheld or not, in part because this was in a Tuscaloosa court. The judge that was supposed to preside over this case, he resigned off the case due to conflict of interest. He was a Alabama donor, so really created that conflict of interest where he recused himself. But with that being said, if this had gone the other way, I think there would have been no other choice but to create legislation in Congress, which we know how that moves. It moves at a very slow process. So the NCAA, they do need to do a better job of creating defined and set rules. But this was a pretty clear one. You look to see if the NCAA can maybe make some adjustments to their bylaws and really codify what they need to do going forward so we have no more gray areas. Like in the case of so many athletes right now in the basketball season. And then if that doesn't work, the next step is probably getting something taken care of in our Congress and in the federal government. But before then, the NCAA needs to do a better job of solidifying the rules and regulations for who's eligible and who's not. So there's a whole lot less subjectivity.
I think this is actually like they do need to do that, but they won this. Like
Yes,
they
this is the first
so
win for the NCAA in a slew of court cases.
so I the current bylaws say that like G League players, including your James Nanji, if they didn't sign an NBA contract and didn't declare for the draft and forego their eligibility, they would still be eligible technically, which is why you've seen a couple of other G Leaguers take the step back to college. Those players were approved by the NCAA.
Yeah.
This time, Bediako was on a two-way contract, never actually made it to the NBA, but that is why he was deemed ineligible. And then, of course, as we've made it clear, the NCAA has won. So obviously, I think it is a good line in the sand for now. I think a lot of these other players that are considering coming back to play, like most notably Amari Bailey,
Yeah.
they are not going to find themselves with any eligibility unless they can find a judge to give them 10 days. And the only reason that this wasn't 10 days, Mike, was because of some weather, which
Yeah.
extended the trial. This should have
Yeah.
been 10 instead of 22 or whatever it ended up being. So, in
And
terms
and
of, or good.
yeah. And at the end of the day, it didn't really help Alabama that much. They lost some games big time still in this. They did beat Auburn, I believe. But with that being said, I think there's going to be some people that are going to say, hey, why can't now the NCAA force Alabama to forfeit that these games that he played in? Unfortunately, due to the laws of the temporary restraining order, they're not allowed to do that because of the TRO. Bediako was eligible.
I
So
think
unfortunately,
there is
uh,
some ways that they can get around that,
sure.
because I know the wording you're talking about, and I've it said like they're not allowed to be punished for it, but
I
the
mean,
way,
you could
yeah.
drop him a couple of spots
So,
in on Selection Sunday.
so the way that this was worded is that the TRO just expired and it was not renewed. If it had
Yes.
been declared like invalid, then maybe they could have been punished in terms
Yeah.
of like actual
Forfeiting
measurable
game.
things
Yeah.
like forfeiting games. But on the other hand, Mike, like the selection process for this sport is not there is no gray, it's very gray. Like it is just up to people. And you
Yeah.
can't prove that if they're a seed line below where they are in the bracket matrix on selection Sunday, they can't sue and prove that that was the reason why. So I
No.
think that is the real like way that they can get punished here is that when the selection committee gets the team sheets, you have the record and you just take away 3 wins and take away 2 losses. Or you can
Yeah.
leave the losses if you want, because I bet those teams want credit for beating Alabama with an extra player. So
Yeah.
that seems to be the path forward here in terms of like what this means for Alabama. I think there's a chance that it costs them a seed line just out of principle. These committee members have very large egos and they don't like to be told what to do. And the fact that they won this, I think they might want to rub it in their face a little bit and maybe dissuade others from trying this same thing.
Yeah. And I will say at the same time, like Alabama is not going to be a protected seed the way things are going right now. Something would have to change drastically for that to happen. So you're looking at like the difference between like a maybe a 7 and an 8 seed. Um, and maybe, the committee bumps them down to a 9 even because of that. Now, you can't really prove per se, unless it's egregious, that they deserved a better seed. But the way Alabama's playing, I think it would be wouldn't be unfair to drop them down a couple seeds.
Yeah, so
And
the Matrix has them at a 5 seed right now. I think I had pretty similar, but of course, you had teams like St. John's and North Carolina pick up big wins over the weekend, and you have teams like Kentucky and Louisville that have won some big games. I think Alabama can get sucked into the in the mud of the 7, 8, 9 line here if they aren't careful. I think it feels like the teams on the 6 line and the other teams on the 5 are playing better than they are right now. And Alabama did win at Auburn, which I
yeah,
think is really
that's
important for
yeah,
them if it can somehow count. It could be on the team sheet, but look, these committee people are locked in a room together for a week with a million TVs. They know the conditions of every win and loss, whether a player was out for the other team or whether you had a tough stretch because your best player was hurt. But I think this is really going to be such a pain to do for bracketology because we know where they're supposed to be. If Selection Sunday was tomorrow, they'd probably be a 5 seed.
yeah,
If their resume is their resume, then if they're being punished for their victories, not counting, then they probably go down to a 6 seed. And then if they're punished even further by just trying to go against the system, where do they are? I think I think they could be a 4 seed, Mike, if they win some games. And I think they could be an 8 or 9 seed just out of pure spite for what they
yeah.
just tried to pull.
And I also think going forward, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of programs that are going to try to do this
Yeah.
again because of how much vitriol was met against this move. Look, you had the commissioner of the SEC, Greg Sankey, calling out Alabama, saying this was bad for the sport. The NCAA commissioner saying this. You had the entirety of the sport saying this is a terrible move. Like nobody was even saying, "Oh, this was smart." It was universally frowned upon. And so, like at the end of the day, this is just bad press for the Crimson Tide, more than anything else.
And we'll have
So,
to see if Nate Oates does, keep his word that, Charles Bediako will be going to class and on scholarship for the rest of the semester.
yeah,
You can make your own judgments on whether that'll happen or not. But in terms of like Alabama, like personnel wise, Mike, I think this is sort of a big deal. They aren't good defensively, and they had a good rim protector back there in Bediako. So I think this does hurt them actually on the court with him not being there too, because they're a little banged up. They don't have great forward play, and it seems like it's just going to be a pure coin toss with how the guards play for the Crimson Tide.
yeah. Bediako probably had his biggest impact on a game in this Alabama game. He had
Auburn.
12 points on 22 minutes of play. Also had a few rebounds, forced a turnover. So this is going to be a big loss. You're talking about a guy that had been averaging about 20 to 25 minutes that is just disappeared from your roster, gone for the rest of the year. That's a lot of minutes to just pick up out of nowhere, especially on a roster that's as banged up as they are. If their bigs get into foul trouble, they're going to be in a world of hurt, especially when you look at some of these teams in the SEC that they're going to play that are pretty tall, that are pretty big. Look, they're going to have a rematch against Auburn in Tuscaloosa. And I have a feeling that the Tigers are going to be pretty fired up for that one. And you're going to have a few other games. Look, Alabama, they don't have a super difficult schedule coming down the stretch, but look, they still got to play at Ole Miss. They got to play Arkansas. They got to go to Tennessee, to Georgia, in Auburn. They're going to have to find a way to win some of those games without Bediako. He wasn't a big factor in the Texas A&M game. They barely got a win there at home. So um, we'll see what happens. But they're certainly not going to compete for an SEC championship, I don't think, without Bediako. And I don't think they're going to compete for anything other than a Sweet 16.
And like you said, Mike, he wasn't probably not in their top 3 or 4 most important players, but he was good at something that the team isn't good at.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, they're going to be even worse at that than they were with him. And they still weren't a great defensive team with him, but
Yeah.
they're like a great rim protector can hide so many faults from a defense where I mean we saw it for years with Creighton and Ryan Kalkbrenner. They would just funnel their players into him. Like they would
Yeah.
get beat and they're like, yeah, take it right at our big guy who's gonna block it. And when he has not been there, when he's been hurt over the years and this year, their defense is not the same. So
Yeah.
I think it's a real weakness for Alabama that unfortunately is going to become even more of one. And it truthfully, Mike, is just going to become a pure coin toss. If they make a ton of threes, they could probably beat anybody. But if they have an off shooting day, I think any team anywhere near the tournament could knock them off, even on their home floor, like Texas showed.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so Mike, let's wrap up this video with some final thoughts.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is a huge win for the NCAA. The NCAA has been in the business of losing a whole lot in the last 5 years. They've lost almost every important court case. So finally, the needle gets pushed enough to where the NCAA gets a big win. For the NCAA, make sure that you've kind of make your rules more airtight going into next season. And then if you're Alabama, look, big loss. You're losing a guy that averages 22 minutes a game and 10 points. How are you going to get that production the rest of the season? I don't feel great if I'm a fan of the Tide right now about extending a Sweet 16 bid.
Yep. So Alabama has their midseason trade deadline acquisition ruled ineligible for the end of the year. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.